Radio.
News, opinion, and a little irreverence from both sides of the 49th parallel. This is Americanuck Radio with Mike Phillip.
On the 29th of March of this year, my assent was signified at Westminster to the Canada Act.
The moment the Queen puts her signature on this document, it becomes law. It will be witnessed later. The Constitution is now home.
Lies! Welcome back to Americanuck Radio. We got our great guest, Doug Force, the creator of a new movie, The Myth is Canada, and I just can't believe how deep this subject is, and if the Canadian people actually knew. And see, there I go, saying the Canadian people. There's no such thing. There's the people of Alberta, the people of BC, the people of Quebec. We need to get that. It's such a psych. I mean, I find myself, my brain just goes there because we've been so indoctrinated. Now, what were we just listening to there, Doug?
Well, and before we get into what we were just listening to, I just wanted to come back on what I had said in the last hour about Section 92.2, and it says direct taxation within the province in order to the raising of revenue for the provincial purposes, and that ties the provinces to income tax only, and that's part of the documentation that we're going to be going through now in this hour. And what happened in 1982 was that the Trudeau government decided that it was getting a little antsy for them, that the people might find out what was going on. The gentleman by the name of Russell Rogers Smith, who I mentioned earlier, he wrote a book in 1965 called Ho Canada, H-O Canada. And regrettably, they pretty much scrubbed it off the internet today. But for anybody who is listening today and comes on to nephilimfilms.com or to our Indiegogo site and donates at least $10 or more, I will personally send them a PDF copy of Ho Canada. And they could have a great perusal in that. Now, the reason that Russell Rogers Smith wrote this is because he was the gentleman that actually in 1930, he wrote the clauses for Mackenzie King that were put into the Statute of Westminster. And Mackenzie King actually took those clauses to the English Parliament, and the English Parliament took them verbatim. In other words, they didn't change a single word that Russell Rogers wrote, and they put them into the Statute of Westminster that freed Canada to confederate or to consolidate a government, de jure government, by the people, for the people. And so in 1982, people had, because they did another printing in 1972 of his book, which, by the way, was the final printing. And Trudeau was a little bit scared of the people might find out what's really going on. So he decided, through his Liberal cabinet, to create a act of Parliament called the Canada Act. And once they had passed that through their Parliament, et cetera, he decided, because don't forget, they were de facto government, but they decided that they needed to cover their butts. So they created
the cat
Canada
was
Act,
out of the bag. It's time to kill the cat before it talks too much. Is that what was going on there, Doug?
Pretty much, and they didn't want anybody to get the knowledge from Russell Rogers' book. They tried desperately, but they couldn't discredit him. The problem was that he was a constitutional expert, and his friends at that time in the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s were the top people in government. They were his friends. Arthur Bouchain and him in the book Ho Canada, Arthur Bouchain and Russell Rogers do what we call the walkabout in Ottawa, looking for the British North American Act in the late 1920s, early 1930s, prior to the Statute of Westminster, because they wanted to figure out Well, where it is? Where is it? Where is it in the archives? Well, it's not in the archives. Where is it? Is it over here in the law library? No, it's not here. Where is it? It was never delivered to Canada, and it was Russell Rogers who figured out that these were letters patent. They had nothing to do with Confederation. They had nothing to do with allowing Canada to confederate or create a legal, lawful government. Canada was a colony, period. And hence the Statute of Westminster was created to allow Canada to be free of being a colony, being a dominion, and moving forward under sovereign nationhood and electing by the people, for the people, a lawful legal government, which never happened. And Trudeau tried to cover that up with the Canada Act, which he then took to a foreign monarch, Queen Elizabeth, who then took it to her parliament, because in the UK, they have what they call a constitutional monarchy, which is a two-part government, the monarchy and the elected officials. So she took that to her parliament and had them pass the law as the Constitution Act of 1982. And within that act, they took the dead document known as the British North American Act and tucked it in there with it. And said, okay, here's the Constitution Act. We're going to call this law in Canada by me signing the document. As we were so wonderful to play that clip where she actually signed it, and the announcer says, when she puts her signature to this document, it will become law in Canada. That's a lie, because what document signed by a foreign monarch has ever been law in any country other than the country that she is the monarch for? She's not a monarch here in Canada. So the bamboozlement or the obfuscation that Trudeau did, he took the documents, and if you recall back in 1982, there was a word that he created. It was called patriate. Not repatriate, but patriate. Or in other words, he brought the British North American Act back to Canada or not back to Canada, but to Canada for the first time. And that's why he used the word patriate, because the British North American Act had never come to Canada prior to that. And so he brought it back. It's a dead document. It doesn't have any standing in law. But the trick was they didn't care, because what the real document was the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And it was done through the UK Parliament. And when you charter something in law, you're actually creating a corporation. So you're chartering a corporation. And so the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I've talked to many people, and they say, "Oh, well, Doug, you know that Canada is on the is registered in the New York Stock Exchange. It's on the SEC. Its head offices are in Washington D.C., et cetera, et cetera." And I say, "Well, you're almost right. There is a corporation, but they didn't go to all that trouble. They just went to the English Parliament in 1982 and had them charter it." The two other more famous corporations that they also did in 1948, the English Parliament chartered the State of Israel, and in 1923, under what was his name, Philby, St. John Philby, which was Kim Philby's father, he actually had the English Parliament create the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was chartered as a corporation as well.
Wow!
And so
So Kim Philby, if you don't know, was the British intelligence officer that was the highest ever caught as being a spy. Correct?
Yeah,
Kim Philby?
That was his son.
Okay.
Yeah, St. John Philby was his father. Which is why
interesting trivia there. Anyway,
it is. That's why I threw that in. It was an interesting little piece. But the enactment that they actually did that actually means anything, because it's an admiralty jurisdictional corporation. It's illegal and it's unlawful. It's de facto because it's pretending to be our government, when in reality it's not. And Trudeau brought that back to Canada, patriated it in 1982, and then he went on to try to, because there were certain things that he couldn't amend, that he wanted to amend, but he couldn't amend whilst in England. And so he tried to create, because he needed the provinces to agree.
We got to stop. We got a commercial break. Stay right where you are, Doug. This is fascinating stuff. We'll be right back after this, everybody. back, everybody. We are live on Americanuck Radio, and Doug was just flowing before the network breaks, so I don't want to take any more time from him in this segment. Doug, let's pick up where you left off. Go ahead.
Well, once again, a little recap here. In 1982, Prime Minister Trudeau, the father of Justin, FYI, went to his parliament, and they created the Canada Act that he then took to the Queen of England, and she took it to her parliament. They created the Constitution Act 1982, which included the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we were just starting to talk about how that affects us. Charter of Rights and Freedoms was an incorporation document that was done by the English Parliament, and so he came back to Canada, and he needed the assistance of the other provinces. In other words, the other provinces needed to get together and allow him to change the Constitution without their interference. This is what he wanted to do. Well, they didn't agree to that. They told him to go pound sand, and so he retired from politics, and it was left to Brian Mulroney. And Mr. Mulroney, he, if I recall correctly, created the Meech Lake Accords. And you remember, I don't know if you remember, but all the provinces got together, and they couldn't agree to give up their own sovereignty to the federal authority so that the federal authority could amend the Constitution without their input. So the Meech Lake Accord failed. It was tried again under the Charlottetown Accord in 1992, and same thing. They wanted the ability to change the Constitution without the input of the provinces, and it failed as well. And the one thing that they wanted to change in their quote-unquote Constitution was the Clause 92.2, where it said very specifically that direct taxation was the right of the provinces. They wanted to take that away from the provinces.
Of course.
And the provinces didn't want to give that up. By giving that up, they gave up their sovereignty. And so to this day, the provinces, even though they're de facto government, okay, they still have the right of direct taxation under the accord that they point to that gives them the right to exist, which reality is that it's a dead document and doesn't actually give them the right to exist. But let's take a moment here and see who, specifically, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms actually applies to.
Let's do that.
And if you go to, I'm just going to flip to the page so I can be very specific here. Give me a second. Sorry about this.
No problem.
If you go to 32A and B of the Charter Rights and Freedoms, it specifically applies to the provincial or the federal authority and the provincial authority only. It does not apply to anybody here in Canada, the people, the men and women of Canada. It just applies to the federal authority and the provincial authority. Now, under those authorities, they have what they call the Interpretations Act of Canada. And the Interpretations Act of Canada is the highest definition because that's what the government says these words mean. And so when you look in the Interpretations Act of Canada, it's very interesting that when they describe the land, they describe the land that they have authority over is all land underwater. Gee whiz. What does that make them, a boat? But when you look at the Constitution Act that they created here, it says very, very, very carefully, and it's very carefully worded, every citizen of Canada, and every citizen of Canada and every person, and they keep talking about persons, okay, and any person and
There's that word.
Everyone. And everyone, and then it talks all about the individual as well. So we look up in the Standard Dictionary, because the Interpretations Act and the Black's Law Dictionary don't cover everyone, an individual. So we look everyone up in Webster's dictionary, and it says persons, and individual in Webster's dictionary is a person. So what they're actually saying this act applies to are persons. Okay? And in the Interpretations Act of Canada, it says, very specifically, includes a corporation. But if you know the maximum of law that says the inclusion of one is the exclusion of others, what is a person? A person is a corporation. So how can you say that the incorporation document, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, applies to you, the men and women of Canada, when it certainly does not?
Interesting stuff. And everybody head over to Americanuckradio.com and look for the link to Doug's website, because he actually lists out these definitions there. And man, oh man, you want to talk about a deep rabbit hole. Once you start getting into legal terms and definitions, it is never ending, the way that they manipulate words in order to screw people over.
No kidding. And here's just as an aside here, I just wanted to mention this. The Canadian Citizenship Act in Canada, you became a Canadian citizen. So if we were a sovereign nation and we confederated in 1867, why would the Canadian governance create the Canadian Citizenship Act January 1st, 1947?
Interesting question.
What were we before we were Canadian citizens?
Right, exactly. Jeez.
Well, we were British subjects in the colony known as the Dominion of Canada up until 1931. And so once again, they got scared because people weren't, when they issued passports, now they were still issuing British passports up until 1947 to all the people of Canada. And after that, that's when they first started to issue the Canadian passports. So, but were we really Canadian citizens? Well, we were, if we were a person, as they wanted us to be described as a corporation. And how do they, we can get into this name game and all this other stuff, but that's truly for another show. But that's not the solution. The solution that we have here, Mike, is that we have the ability, with the knowledge of the movie that we will be making, we will have the ability to inform the people of what happened to them, and then how we can seat de jure lawful governments in all the provinces, and then go from that, if we so choose, to create a federal authority and create, through a constitutional convention from all the provinces, to seat a de jure Canadian federal government. And this isn't rocket science. There's a lot of stuff that was hidden that took a long time to dig out and to find. You're going down the various rabbit holes, but now I've assembled this with my team, and we're ready to rock and roll and put the movie together. We're going to do an interactive website that will coincide with the movie that people can actually come to and download the how-to create a constitutional convention.
Beautiful work. Yeah, so we could actually forge our own destiny and set things up the way that we want. Doug Force on Americanuck Radio. We'll be back after this.
There was a cat that really was gone. Rasputin, Russia's greatest love machine. It was a shame how he carried on.
Americanuck Radio.
Oh, those Russians.
Welcome back to Americanuck Radio, everybody. This is your host, Mike Phillip, with Craig Owen Jenkins, Super Don Naylor, riding shotgun. Great guest, Doug LaForce. During the break, we figured out what happened in Canada. The Russians clearly shot a brain ray at the people and caused us to worship the Trudeau family forever. It was the Russians!
The Russians did it. Oh, my God.
The Russian love machine, Rasputin.
That's right. We're all under his spell. So let's get back into it, Doug. I don't want to waste any more of your time here. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to, once again, I'm going to tell the people today that we are crowdfunding The Myth is Canada through our website at www.nephilimfilms.com. That's Nephilim spelled Nephalem. And through that, you go to the right top top right-hand corner, and you push donations, and you can find the page where we have all the donations we do through e-transfer, through PayPal, through Indiegogo. We're set up on Indiegogo for crowdfunding as well, and we'll even take Ether or Bitcoin. And today and tomorrow, anybody who donates any more than $10 to our crowdfunding cause will get a PDF copy emailed from me directly to them of the book Ho Canada by Russell Rogers Smith. It's a great read. If you don't think what's happening today is pertinent to you, as people say, well, I'm really not that interested in politics. Let me tell you, politics is very interested in you.
And listen, hey, how difficult is it to get this book? You can't just pick it up anywhere?
No, it's been scrubbed off the internet. I've been lucky I grabbed it years ago before they scrubbed it. I've been looking. I did Google searches and Bing searches and DuckDuckGo searches and so forth for it over the last few months because I want to make sure, if it is there, I'd like to make sure that I can take people and direct them to it, but it's gone. And so I have copies of it in a PDF format that I'm willing to send out to anybody who will donate to our crowdfunding effort, $10 or more today and tomorrow. I'll email it directly to you. And you can have whatever the perks that we have on the Indiegogo site as well. But you're going to get this book literally Monday, Tuesday. I will sit down and I will email them all out to the people that have done us that wonderful service of donating $10 or more to our crowdfunding effort.
Well, I'm going to go over there and donate $10 right after the show. You've got me convinced.
Well, thank you very much. What I'm going to do now is take a moment and define de facto and define de jure for the people listening.
Good.
This is from Black's Law Dictionary. And what is de facto government? The term is applied to a government that has not been elected to the laws of the land. I just let that one sink in for a second.
Yeah, I looked it up on Merriam-Webster, and it said governing as if lawfully. As if. Right.
As if, exactly. Then what is a de jure government? The term that applies to a legally constituted government that has been placed in power in accordance with the laws of the land. Now, if you recall, I was talking about the Interpretations Act of Canada, and their definition of land is all land underwater.
Why?
So where do they have their foot?
Well, why would they do that, though? What advantage would that have?
In what respect? In defining their... Well, because they're an admiralty jurisdictional incorporation or a law merchant
Admiralty law, right.
So where's admiralty law? Where's law merchant? Law merchant is law of the sea.
Yep.
So they brought that on shore, and they're pretending that you're on a boat at sea when you deal with them. But you ain't.
I've looked at this before, and it's a pretty big topic in regards to the courts and everything else. Yeah, that's absolutely where they go with it. And we're not taught that in school.
Well, no, and the funny thing is that there are no common law courts in Canada, not provincially, not federally. And the reason for it is that these governance, these de facto governments, can't exist in common law. What is common law? Common law is law of the land.
Ooh. Natural law.
Ooh. Well, it's also called the common law. And I'm not talking about English common law, for that matter, because the Americans, when they created the Constitution of the United States, they took from the English an outline of how their court should work. In other words, that if a court in one state convicted somebody of a crime and were sentenced to that crime of X amount of years, then the other state would follow that logic. In other words, they wouldn't be creating new law all the time for the same crime and from one state to another. So, and it was called, oh my goodness, it's been a long time since I've read that Constitution. But they had a clause in the Constitution that allowed that to happen, and it was all part of making sure that everybody was treated fairly in the eyes of the law as constitutional common law dealt with law of the land. Here in Canada, regrettably, under the Dominion, when we were a colony, we did have English common law. We did have English common law courts that dealt with people in common law. But in 1931, after the Statute of Westminster nullified the British North American Act, and hence we were no longer considered a colony of the British Empire, the common law was removed. Now, it's interesting, why would they do that? And people have asked me, say, well, Doug, why would they take out Section 2 of the British North American Act, removing the Queen and the monarch from Canada? Why would they take out the enacting clause? Why would they do that? And then why would they kill that document? Well, during Queen Victoria's reign, all of the colonies, because don't forget that the Statute of Westminster didn't just apply to Canada, it applied to Australia, New Zealand, and some of the Caribbean countries, along with South Africa and Canada. And so they released them all because the empire got tired of having money flow from the empire out to their colonies. And in military costs, et cetera, that went along with the Navy and the boots on the ground military, along with other costs that they had to cover for the colonies to exist. And so Victoria said, enough of this. We'll turn this around. We'll allow these colonies to become sovereign nations, constitute legal, lawful government, and then we're going to invite them into the Commonwealth. And that way, the money flows from them to us.
That's very interesting. And I've heard it asked, why don't we get dividends instead of being charged taxes? And that would definitely answer that question.
Well, and the funny thing is that Canada is worth, with the resources in the ground, according to the World Bank in 1995, $30 trillion U.S. dollars. That's 1995 money. And if you extrapolate that out to 2017 money, that 30 trillion is something like 80 or 90 trillion today. So, and you divide that by 30 million people.
Oh, yeah.
Billionaires.
We're
billionaires. We are a country of billionaires. Yet we don't actually get a taste of any of it. If you recall, under the Harper government, back with his last term in office, he had an austerity government. In other words, it's time to cut the benefits to the people and pay the bills to the bankers and allow the rich to get richer and debase the currency. But then the Trudeau government was sworn in and everybody thought, oh, Mr. Trudeau is going to be so wonderful. He's going to legalize marijuana and to hell with whatever else he does because we don't care. We just want to get high.
Because we're all high.
Yeah, crazy stuff. We'll be right back after this network break on the Genesis Communications Network with Doug Force on Americanuck Radio. Stick around for the final segment of this show.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the is that? What is that, Private Pile?
Americanuck Radio. Americanuck Radio.
We're back live. Final segment of Americanuck Radio on this beautiful weekend in November. The snow is melting. I'm going to be celebrating American Thanksgiving, and we're having a turkey tomorrow. So to all of our American listeners, happy Thanksgiving. Be thankful for what you have on this weekend. Now, back to Doug Force. We've got 10 minutes left. Doug, remind people where to get a copy of Ho Canada for the low, low price of $10.
Well, and we're crowdfunding funding The Myth is Canada through our website at nephilimfilms.com, at NEPHALEM films.com. You go to the upper right-hand corner, push the donation button, and you can donate anything from $10 or more. This weekend, I will be sending out Ho Canada, the book written by Russell Rogers Smith in 1965 that explains what's really gone on here in Canada. Don't forget that Russell Rogers Smith was the gentleman that created the clauses that went into the Statute of Westminster for Mackenzie King. Mackenzie King took them to England, and the English Parliament took them verbatim and put them into the Statute of Westminster that ended the British North American Act and allowed Canada to confederate or constitute a legal and lawful government, which the powers that be at that time decided they didn't like losing their power or their wealth. So they decided to continue to pretend that they were the government of Canada. And to this day, they are still pretending. And here we are with all the information that we will be able to bring to you with the crowdfunding that we're doing here for The Myth is Canada. And the film itself will go into finite detail as to what has happened and why, and what we can do to fix it. We were talking just before the break about the Harper government going on an austerity program and removing benefits for us, but the Trudeau government, once they were elected, they maintained and actually increased austerity for the people of Canada, but increased their spending and giving money to the United Nations, to various countries, billions and billions of dollars of taxpayer money going off to foreign countries and foreign despots, and little, the homeless situation here in Canada in the major cities is getting out of hand. Yep. I was told a statistic, a really awful statistic, that over 40,000 children here in Canada are homeless. How disgusting is that for a first world country?
No kidding.
No kidding. I was absolutely flabbergasted when I was told this. Now, I can't, I'm sorry to say, I don't have verification on that number, but the person that told that to me had no reason to lie. And it's just, we sit in this country, we think we're great, and the reality is that the governance that govern us is illegal and unlawful, and they're stealing our wealth. The country has oil in the ground, minerals in the ground, gold, silver, up the wazoo, natural gas,
diamonds,
et cetera, et cetera.
Diamonds, yeah. I got a buddy that works up the Ecadie diamond mine, and
there you go. Diamonds up in the territories. The tar sands project, which they destroyed. There's a funny story. Years ago, General Electric created a process to remove 100% of the oil out of the tar sands, and then the pollution that would have come out was zero, because they would have clean water, fresh water, because 100% of the oil out of the water meant that there is no oil in the water, and sand, period, without any oil in it, and 100% recovery. And the funny thing was that the tar sands, the Alberta tar sands, would have been the only oil project in the world supplying oil for the rest of the world, because it would have been 100% recovery, and for 100 years we would have not had to look to Saudi Arabia, to Venezuela, or any other country for oil for the entire world. And so they shelved that patent and they tucked it away, so that now the oil sands is filthy, it's high pollution, and it's just destroying the land that it sits on, and the surrounding lakes and waters and tributaries and groundwater situation up there. We're going to have a major problem in the years to come cleaning that mess up. And this is because the people have no say in what that government, de facto government, can and cannot do. We simply have one thing, only one thing. We have the right to vote. That's it. But anything after that, shut the heck up and go away.
Yeah, absolutely. During the break, we were talking amongst ourselves, and I expressed the thought that I don't have a lot of confidence in Canadians that even if they had this information, that they would have the capacity to come out of their sleep and do something about it. And you told me something that actually gave me a lot of hope. Go ahead and relay that to the audience here.
Well, I've been invited to speak at a university radio station, which I'm hoping to set up for next week. And it was the kids. We're talking millennials here that are in university that the gentleman wants to bring me on, and it was them that came forward and said, "Well, wait a minute, we want to learn more." And I know that the people of Canada aren't dumbed down. I know that the people of Canada are very intelligent human beings. The wonderful thing is that what they need is an impetus. They need a spark. And so if they have to tune into your radio station and that spark starts them on that road of discovery, or they will tune into that channel where I was on with Hugh Riley, and they can stream that online, that's great too. Whatever it takes to spark them. By the way, I'm going to throw in a kicker here for Conspiracy Show, and Richard Surrett had me on last Sunday for 2 hours. It was a wonderful show, and a big thank you out to Richard and the Conspiracy Show done here in Toronto as well. And the people that tune in, the people that actually called in, that asked questions, et cetera, I mean, it was all very... Oh, I'm getting another call.
Yeah, you're getting another call.
Son of a gun, I'm a busy guy.
That's okay. We need to get this to everybody. Absolutely, everybody listening right now. Go and donate so that this film can be made. You can head over to Americanuckradio.com. There's a link to his website. We're going to leave that up for a while. I also co-host KJJ Radio with Kevin J. Johnston every single morning from 7 to 8 Mountain Standard Time. And I'm going to plug this on there. We're going to have you on there as well. And we're talking about bringing you on Reality Radio 101. So we're going to get this message out. It never, I would think about this mass immigration coming into Britain. And why would the Queen want to destroy her own country? And you see the same thing happening over here. And it turns out it was completely unlawful in the first place.
Well, exactly, and their idea is to decrease the population of the planet. I mean, here we'll throw a little conspiracy theory out there while we're exiting off the air here tonight.
Georgia Guidestones.
The Georgia Guidestones, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, those are eugenics programs. If you look at climate change and the fraud of global warming due to a gas that's heavier than air called carbon dioxide, it's the gas of life, but it's also the gas you exhale. And their whole idea behind having this climate change come through as law is to be able to chip every human being on the planet and then regulate how much you can exhale in a certain period of time. And then they will fine you in the beginning and then slowly move into penalties that don't include money, but include shutting your breathing off for a penalty of, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes.
Saudi Arabia, actually, I was reading an article that they were experimenting with chips that they would put in convicts that would release arsenic and kill them on the spot if the RFID chip was activated.
There you go.
I read about that. I think that was actually about 3 years ago. But as far as the environmentalism thing goes, I'm in oil country, okay? I've been a roughneck. I've worked on drilling rigs, service rigs, pump jack repair, water trucks. And I've had friends that worked in reclamation, and one of them in particular was telling me about they went to a site where they had a blowout. Straight crude was flying out of the ground and spraying all over the place in one particular direction because of the wind. He said that 2 years later, they went back, and everywhere that crude was spraying, the plant life was going crazy because the oil was full of minerals from deep earth, and it caused things to grow. So when you hear people freaking out about how these pipeline leaks are destroying the environment, nothing could be further from the truth. That oil comes from the earth. I hear the music, and that means that we're at the end of another show. Doug, I appreciate you coming on so much. You have not heard the last from me, and neither has my listening audience. Everybody catch us over at kjjradio.com Monday morning, 7 to 8 Mountain Standard Time. This is Mike, Phillip, Craig Owen Jenkins, and Super Don Naylor signing off on another episode of Americanuck Radio. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Americanuck Radio.